Howdy, it's Uncle Paul, and I'm going to read Chapter 2 from my little book, Bears Don't Eat Fat People. Just a reminder, I wrote this in 2003. It was self-published, and I was living in Wyoming, DuBois, Wyoming. I had been preaching up there for a few years, and now this is called creative nonfiction because most every bit of it is true. Certainly my feelings are true. Most every single story is true, especially when they dealt with the past before this time. But a few things are fictional, and I'll try to point that out when I can. But so just keep that in mind. This is some things I included just to kind of make the story go along as part of the theme, the plot of the story. So, okay, well, without further ado, I'm going to read Chapter 2, The Education. Since my arrival in DuBois, I had ventured into the mountains only a few times. Even in the seclusion of the forest, I worried about someone spying my grand size. My truck was my refuge, and no trail, despite its promised brevity and beauty, could coax me from it. A forest ranger from a distant tower watching for fires might get a glimpse and a chuckle at my expense. How depressing, how sad. Finally making it to the mountains with the moose and the bears, I refused to frolic due to the irrational fear of what I considered fat exhibitionism. What a wasted opportunity. Eventually I quit going up in the mountains for fear my truck would break down and I would have to walk back. Oh, the horror! Not considering the walk would probably kill me, I was more afraid of being exposed to every hiker, biker, sightseer, rancher, and mountain man that would undoubtedly pass by. What a story they would have. Hey, did I ever tell you about the time I ran into a great big fat guy in the woods? Well, maybe it wouldn't make a very good story. Conjures up ideas of the movie Deliverance, Ned Beatty, and pig squealing. Once again, my weight was spoiling my life. Frolicking with the moose and bears would be on my growing list of things to do if I ever lost weight. One Sunday morning following worship, the ladies and I stood in the parking lot talking as usual. Alice said, "Oh, I nearly forgot to tell you. My grandson Cody had to kill a bear a few days ago." Everyone reacted with great interest and urged her to tell more. She explained that Cody was working for a local outfitter as a hunting guide. One of the clients killed a mountain sheep in the morning and returned to camp for lunch. They removed the horns from the animal and left them outside as they ate in the cook tent. When they finished lunch and exited the tent, the horns were gone. A bear was the immediate suspect. The hunting party split up and, with their guns in hand, began to search for the horns. Not long into the search, a grizzly bear reared up out of the brush with horns in its mouth, no more than 30 feet from Cody. Releasing the horns, the bear charged. Cody was quick with his rifle and shot the bear until it fell dead. Alice said Cody was so shook up he didn't eat for 3 days. I was intrigued by the story. Being interested in the mountains for so long, I certainly had read about bear attacks and bear killings, but didn't think much about them. It was an uncommon occurrence and always seemed so distant. Never had I personally known someone who killed a bear. Hearing of this incident, which hit close to home, made me give more serious thought to the matter of bears. My newfound curiosity propelled me to read everything concerning bears. The most convenient information came from an old set of encyclopedias found in a closet when I moved into the house. Another source was pamphlets offered by the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. Next, I turned to magazines, which featured articles about bear attacks, and the Internet, which provided additional frightening personal accounts. The horrifying reality began to sink in. I had moved to a country where I was no longer at the top of the food chain. The greatest part of my life had been spent on the other side of the equation, constantly hunting for food to consume. Now there were creatures out there that wanted to consume me. Information from the Wyoming Game and Fish Department proclaimed that bears didn't actually want to eat me, but might be forced into it due to the mistakes on my part. Somehow, knowing a bear didn't really want to eat me didn't bring much solace. Out of curiosity, I referred to a source not yet considered. Were there any stories about bears in the Bible? Interestingly, the Bible compares men who have a war mentality to a mother bear without her cubs, 2 Samuel 17:8 and Hosea 13:8. Bears were also used by God to exact his judgment. The prophet Elisha was traveling to the city of Bethel, and as he was going up the road, some youths came from the city and mocked him and said to him, "Go up, you bald head! Go up, you bald head!" So he turned around and looked at them and pronounced a curse on them in the name of the Lord. And 2 female bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the youths. 2 Kings 2:23 and 24. I can only imagine what it would be like to have ultimate and justifiable power over those who make fun. My final source was the people of the town of Dubois. Having lived among bears for many years, surely they would be full of comforting wisdom. Those hikers are fools for going up in the mountains without a gun, was the consensus. The U.S. government didn't share this point of view. It discouraged using guns as protection from bears. Instead, a spray repellent was the suggested weapon to thwart a vicious attack. In Texas, spray repellents were used for thwarting vicious attacks by ants or spiders, not creatures that crack you open and taste your creamy center. Ignorance had been bliss, but this new education cultivated a growing fear. News of a second incident that hit close to home and added to my fear came from my mother's weekly phone call. She informed me that Randy, a longtime friend from Houston, had a frightening encounter with a grizzly bear while hunting in Canada. Over the next few weeks, I heard many versions of the story relayed by friends and family. Finally, I contacted Randy to get the truth firsthand. I couldn't believe that this was how I was going to die, he said. I had always thought I might die in a car crash or be shot by a mugger, but not like this, not eaten alive. Randy was on a 10-day bow hunting trip in northern British Columbia near the Yukon border. The chosen game was moose and mountain goats. He killed a moose early in the trip, but bagging a mountain goat was going to be more difficult. Their favorite habitat was the highest windswept peaks above the timberline, which provided protection from grizzly bears and humans. Early one morning, Randy and his guide spotted 2 goats on the face of a cliff about 3,000 or 4,000 feet high. The 2 men planned to hike to the summit above the goats and then look over the edge of the cliff in hopes of relocating them. The hike would be a long, grueling affair, and wanting to lighten the load, the guide left his rifle behind. Randy slung his bow over his shoulder as he climbed up the boulder fields. Most of the day passed before they reached the summit. A 30-minute search revealed that the goats were not in the same area that they had been that morning. The next plan was for the guide to descend the slope and work his way along the base of the cliff, trying to drive the game to Randy's position on the summit. Another hour passed without success, and with binoculars and hand signals, the men planned to meet back at their original starting point. Alone and with fading daylight, Randy slung his bow over his shoulder and began the descent. Walking down a rocky wash about 500 yards above the timberline, he heard a loud woof to his left. The corner of his eye caught the movement of a large brown object. Turning to look, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. A mature grizzly bear, about 60 yards away, was trotting toward him, looking directly into his eyes. I looked away momentarily, Randy explained, hoping it was a figment of my imagination induced by fatigue. But when he looked again, the bear was still coming and closing in fast. Running was futile, and there were no trees to climb. Randy took 2 steps toward the bear and began to yell, trying to bluff it. When this didn't work, he considered reaching down to pick up a rock. The idea was abandoned for fear that lowering his body would indicate submission, triggering a predator-prey response from the bear. When the bear got within 15 paces, Randy gave up hope of it stopping and was resigned to putting up a fight. I swung my bow around so I could feed it to him first, he said, and then the bear stopped his charge, mere feet from where I stood. Never taking his eyes off of Randy's face, the bear began to walk in a semicircle around him. The bear's head was as big around as a 55-gallon drum, and saliva was dripping from its lips. The long, individual silver-guard hairs stood out on its hump. Randy took from around his neck a laser rangefinder normally used to pinpoint the distance to a hunter's prey. He threw it at the bear, hitting it on the shoulder. Without flinching, the bear continued its frightening circle. Randy expected it to rush in for the kill at any moment. Suddenly, the bear turned and began to trot up the hill. When it was about 30 yards away, it looked back and stared at Randy for what seemed a lifetime. After a few seconds, the bear loped over the opposite side of the wash from where he had come. "I never saw it again," said Randy, "except in nightmares." The whole incident lasted about 1 minute, one terror-filled minute, and made a profound impact on Randy. Such an experience would prompt anyone to reevaluate life and make changes. Is that what I needed? One terror-filled minute? Would that force me into making much-needed changes in my life? But facing a bear in the wild would be too dangerous. Cody and Randy were very blessed that they had not become belly cheer for bears. Actually, thinking back on all I had read concerning bear encounters, most ended similarly to Cody and Randy's experience. Only a fraction of human bear encounters result in the mutilation or death of the human. For those unfortunate enough to meet with a tragic end, there must be a common denominator. Surely each situation shared something that led to the devouring of humans. My new consuming goal was to discover that link. Days passed and were filled with revisiting the numerous articles and other sources concerning catastrophic bear attacks. The missing link was never revealed, but an interesting observation struck me. In all my research of those who have been eaten by bears, none of the victims were fat. Some may have been considered slightly overweight, but there was no evidence that any were grotesquely obese. How odd. What is the old joke? How do you keep from getting eaten by a bear? Take someone along that runs slower than you. Sounds smart to me. History, I would think, should be filled with fat people falling victim to such raw-boned cunning. Not only are they not good at foot races, fat people are also not adept at climbing trees. Out of all the incidents I read about, why did bears not eat fat people? Could it be that bears simply don't eat fat people? Was such a theory so far-fetched? Yes, it seemed illogical. After all, I couldn't picture a bear running past a 5-course meal to get to a toothpick. However, the evidence supported my hypothesis that no truly fat person had become bear refreshment. So, what was the answer? Clearly, there was only one thing to do. The theory must be tested. One evening, I drove to a scenic overlook to the outskirts of Du Bois. It was atop a hill overlooking the town and provided a gorgeous 360-degree view of the surrounding mountains. Many times I enjoyed watching the sunset from the secluded park. The view was especially breathtaking during the winter. Adorned by a blanket of snow, the mountains imparted a sense of peace, even coziness. The reality, I knew, was much different. One thing I learned is the mountains are dangerous, and it takes an adventurous soul to test them. I'd never been adventurous, but if I was going to validate my theory, that would have to change. The more I thought about it, the more I wanted the experience of facing a bear in the wild. A part of me said it was a stupid idea, but another part, a perverted desire to seek out a grizzly and confront the fear. Right now, they were slumbering in their winter homes. My prospective adventure would have to wait until spring. The end of chapter 2. You know, it's kind of interesting. I have not read this little book in a long time. And, wrote it. I was in my early 30s when I wrote it. And it just strikes me reading this, of how, I've talked about on my channel how, I did want to become a recluse in the past, and how I did have a lack of confidence. And I can really see it in this book. It's reminding me, of how I really dreaded being out in public. I mean, I don't know that I ever had any what was it called? Anxiety attacks or anything like that, but probably close to it. And so what I'm realizing, and I've known this, but reading this again, is that I'm not the same. I don't have those same feelings. I don't know if it's maturity, growth. It's been a long time since I've had those same feelings of the insecurity and the embarrassment. I'm not. I don't have that same kind of complex, of shame that I did for so many years of my life. So that's obviously a positive thing. So. Anyway, I hope you liked chapter 2, and so tomorrow or the next day, I don't know, but I'll be bringing you chapter 3.